Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor once again today to talk about jobs, about manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing jobs, as we all know, are high-quality jobs. Manufacturing jobs come with higher pay and higher benefits. Manufacturing jobs help create other local service sector jobs, and manufacturing jobs contribute more to the local economy than jobs in any other sector. And beyond that, Mr. President, manufacturers invest the most of any industry sector in research and development, something critical to America's continued growth and our security as a leading innovation economy. So last week, 21 Senate colleagues and I joined in a new initiative, the Manufacturing Jobs for America initiative, to help create good manufacturing jobs here at home today and tomorrow. It's grown now to 25 senators who've all contributed different policy ideas. This isn't one big mega bill with dozens of sponsors, but just one bill. Instead, it's a constellation of 40 different proposals. Some of them have already been introduced as bills, and half of those that have been introduced are bipartisan. These bills represent some of our best ideas about how we can work together across the aisle to provide badly needed support for our growing manufacturing sector here in the United States. There's 4 different areas that these 40 different proposals fall into, and I wanted to talk about one of them today. 3 of them are, how do we open markets abroad? How do we strengthen America's 21st century manufacturing workforce? How do we create a long-term environment for growth? 3, manufacturing strategy. But the 4th is, how do we ensure access to capital? So of the 4, today I wanted to speak to access to capital. As any business owner knows, you can't ensure the long-term growth and vitality of your business unless you have capital to invest, whether in research and development, new workers, new products, or new equipment to expand into new markets. So access to capital is absolutely essential to manufacturing jobs for America. The 3 bills I'm going to talk about today, which are part of this constellation of 40 different proposals, each would expand access to capital for manufacturers in different ways. Let me start with the Startup Innovation Credit Act. This is an existing bipartisan bill that I've introduced along with Senators Enzi, Rubio, Blunt, and Moran, who are all Republicans, and Senators Schumer, Stabenow, and Kaine, all like me, Democrats. Although we represent different parties, come from different parts of the country, and have different backgrounds, we've all come together to strengthen our economy and, in particular, to support innovation and entrepreneurship. One way we do that now is to support private sector innovation in manufacturing through the Research and Development Tax Credit. The R&D tax credit generates new products and industries, benefiting other sectors. But there's a critical gap in the long-standing R&D tax credit. It isn't available to startups because they're not yet profitable. This is a tax credit that you can only take if you have a tax liability and are profitable. So we worked together, Senator Enzi and I and the other co-sponsors, to fix this hole with a relatively simple tweak. That's what the Startup Innovation Credit Act does. It allows companies to claim the R&D tax credit against their employment tax liability rather than an income tax liability, a corporate income tax liability. Supporting small innovative companies in their critical early stages of research and development could unleash further innovations and unleash greater growth that would spur good job creation for Americans for the long run. Between 1980 and 2005, all net new jobs created in the U.S. were created by firms 5 years old or less. In total, that was about 40 million jobs over those 25 years. This credit is specifically designed with those new, young firms in mind, those early-stage firms that are the font of the greatest source of creativity and of jobs. It's limited to those companies that are 5 years old or less, and it's limited to being an offset against their W-2 liability, so we can provide some access for early-stage startups to this R&D credit that encourages them to hire more folks and to grow more quickly. Just a part of manufacturing jobs for America. The second bill I'd like to talk about today is the Master Limited Partnership Parity Act. That's a mouthful, Mr. President, but it also levels the playing field in access to credit. But instead of giving smaller, early-stage startup companies the same access to capital that larger, more mature firms have, this bill levels the playing field in the energy sector. And it levels the playing field in particular for clean energy firms. This is a bipartisan bill as well. I introduced it with Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow as my lead co-sponsor and Republican Senators Jim Moran and Lisa Murkowski. And I am grateful for their persistent and engaged leadership on this bill. I'm thrilled in the last couple of days that Democratic Senator Mary Landrieu and Republican Senator Susan Collins have signed on as co-sponsors as well. The MLP Parity Act allows us to really have an all-of-the-above energy strategy. As I've heard as I presided in my first 2 years, as I served on the Energy Committee, there are many senators here, Republican and Democrat, who think we shouldn't be picking winners and losers in technology, and we should be promoting an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and this bill makes that possible in clean energy financing and in preserving a widely used tool for existing traditional energy financing. Oil and gas will play a significant role in our nation's energy picture for the foreseeable future, but right now we don't have a level playing field between renewables and between oil and gas and pipelines. For nearly 30 years, traditional non-renewable sources of energy have had access to master limited partnerships. MLPs give natural gas, oil, and coal companies access to private capital at a lower cost. That's something that capital-intensive projects like pipelines badly need. But alternative energy projects, I would argue, now need that as well, in fact, in some ways more than ever. I spoke just last night to a group of board members at the National Academies of Science. And what we spoke about was how much technology has developed, has sped up in the clean energy space, but how financial innovation hasn't kept pace. This has held back renewable energy and investments in energy efficiency, even as technology has made energy production and distribution and energy efficiency cheaper to achieve. Expanding access through this broad bipartisan bill to low-cost, long-term capital would be an important step to letting new energy sources take off and letting them compete on a level playing field with all sources of energy. That's exactly what the MLP Parity Act intends to do. Last but not least, I was proud to be able to join a number of other senators in co-sponsoring the Small Brew Act. Senators Cardin and Begich, Senators Collins and Murkowski, Democrats and Republicans, have worked together to give small brewers a leg up by lowering the excise tax that they face on the beer they produce. Small brewers, such as Dogfish Head in my home state of Delaware, are big job creators in communities across this country. As Senator Ben Cardin said on the floor earlier this year, while some people may think this is a bill about beer, it is really about jobs. And I would say jobs, manufacturing. Small and independent brewers today employ more than 100,000 Americans and pay more than $3 billion in wages and benefits. Sam Calgione, the owner of Dogfish Head Brewery in my home state of Delaware, now employs 180 workers at their facility in Milton. Of course, what they're manufacturing is not a new or innovative or recently invented product. People have been brewing beer for thousands of years. But Sam's done a remarkable job of coming up with a very broad range of different brews and, in fact, of bringing back brews that are centuries or millennia old by recovering ancient recipes for fantastic and tasty beers. What I'm focusing on, though, today is about the expansion. This particular company has invested $50 million in a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. And when I recently visited, I was struck at how different it is from the beer bottling plant of the past, from what some may have seen on Laverne and Shirley, or what they might have imagined a traditional manufacturing plant to look like. Those folks who work on the bottling line, on the manufacturing line at this particular facility, have to be able to use programmable logic controls. They have to be able to do quality control and math, and to communicate as a team, and to communicate in a way that puts them at the cutting edge of advanced manufacturing. This highlights some of the biggest challenges in manufacturing. It takes a lot of money to invest in the plant and machinery to make them capable of competing as a modern-day plant. It takes access to capital. But we also need to change the public's perception of what manufacturing is. It is a very different place to work, a manufacturing line, than it was 20 or 50 years ago. They're safe, they're clean, they're well lit. These are decent, high-paying jobs. And if we're going to win in the global competition for manufacturing, we need to strengthen the skills and the perceptions of manufacturing across our country. Well, Mr. President, each of the three bills I've spoken about today will help create good manufacturing jobs here in America, and I believe are ready for consideration on a bipartisan basis by this chamber. We need to take action together on a bipartisan basis to get our economy going again. And I'll remind you, manufacturing jobs are not just decent jobs, not just good jobs, they're great jobs. They're the jobs of today and tomorrow. They're the jobs that sustain and build the backbone of the American middle class. We already have all the tools in this country to ensure its growth. But if we work together and put in place stronger and better federal policies in partnership with the private sector, we can put jets on our manufacturing sector and it can take off and grow again. With that, Mr. President, I'll yield the floor. Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, every so often, in between the crises, in between the rancor and the partisan fighting, we get an opportunity to make some real progress here in the Senate. This week, we're considering the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, a bill to put in place basic workplace protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans. It's been a big year for equality nationally and in my home state of Delaware. The Delaware General Assembly legalized same-sex marriage earlier this year in May, giving every Delawarean access to the full rights and responsibilities of marriage, no matter their orientation. A month later, Delaware's General Assembly built on its 3-year-old law protecting LGBT people from workplace discrimination, adding protections for transgender Delawareans as well. These two laws were about dignity, respect, and basic fairness for our neighbors. Of course, a month later, the United States Supreme Court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, giving all married couples across our country access to the federal benefits they're due. This has truly been an historic year for civil rights and for our country. But for all our progress, much remains to be done. In 29 states, it is still legal to fire someone just because they're gay, just because they're lesbian, or just because they're bisexual. That means more than 4 million Americans across those states go to work day in and day out having no protection against being fired summarily because of who they love. And in 33 states, which include more than 5 million people, it's legal to fire someone because of their gender identity. I want to thank my colleague, the senator from Oregon, for his hard work leading this fight here on the floor, and the senator from Iowa for his long advocacy for this bill that should have passed years and years ago. More than 40% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual Americans and almost 80% of transgender Americans say they've been mistreated in the workplace because of who they are, because of who they love. Clearly, there is still work for us to do. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act would provide basic protections against workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. It's a bill that's built on our nation's historic civil rights laws, including the Civil Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is about basic fairness. The overwhelming majority of Americans, in fact more than 80%, think that it is already against the law to fire someone just because they're gay. Most Fortune 500 companies already have policies prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in place. Some of Delaware's biggest employers and companies, DuPont, Dow, Bank of America, TD Bank, Christiana Care, and the University of Delaware, have led the way with their own policies to protect the rights of LGBT Delawareans and their employees. There is real momentum behind these protections, and it is time for Congress to pass this law. Protecting Americans from discrimination is part of America's shared values, and it needs to be part of our laws as well. No one here thinks it's okay to fire someone simply because they're African American, or because they're a woman, or because they're an older American. It's not okay to fire someone because they are gay or transgender either. Equality is a fundamental part of our shared American values, to do unto others, to treat people with the respect and dignity with which you want them to treat you. And majorities in every state support putting these protections in place. Majorities of Democrats, of Republicans, and of independents support putting these protections in place. Majorities in every Christian denomination support putting these protections in place. And the majority of small business owners surveyed support putting these protections in place. Freedom from discrimination is a fundamental American value that we don't just share, we cherish. Why not put these protections in place now, today, to ensure that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Americans will be able to go to work, to earn a living, to provide for themselves and their families without the fear of being fired just because of who they are? Mr. President, the opportunity that's in front of every one of us is an important one. Leadership on civil rights in this chamber has traditionally been bipartisan, and this period of partisanship on civil rights is only fairly recent and needn't be permanent. In fact, this bill is co-sponsored by two of our Republican colleagues, Senator Collins of Maine and Senator Kirk of Illinois. When he came to the floor to speak on ENDA earlier this week, Senator Kirk noted the importance of a senator from his home state of Illinois being in a position of leadership on this civil rights issue. This really is an historic opportunity, and when the Senate votes on final passage of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act tomorrow, I hope we all will take advantage of this historic opportunity. Thank you. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I so much appreciate the comments of my colleague from Delaware. First, speaking to the importance of rebuilding our manufacturing sector, of creating living wage jobs, how important that is to building the middle class, providing the foundation for families to thrive. And then speaking to the core issue we're debating today, that of ending significant discrimination against millions of American citizens. Your words were well spoken. I say to the senator from Delaware, thank you for your advocacy that will make this nation work better for so many of our fellow citizens. Mr. President, this issue of freedom from discrimination is a core issue of freedom. It's a core issue of liberty, and it goes right to the heart of the founding of this country. Our founders were chafing under the heavy hand, often from the land that they came from across the ocean. They wanted to be able to forge their own world, where they were able to participate fully in society. And so liberty and freedom became right at the heart of our founding documents. Our Declaration of Independence says in its second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that concept of liberty was echoed when we went to our U.S. Constitution, and it started out as Americans are well aware, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Well, we the people sought in that year to establish a more perfect union, and we continue in our pursuit of a more perfect union, one with more complete blessings of liberty. And what indeed is liberty? That opportunity to participate fully in your society. This was well captured by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was speaking in 1965 to Howard University students at their commencement, and President Johnson said, freedom is the right to share fully and equally in American society, to vote, to hold a job, to enter a public place, to go to school. President Johnson continued, it is the right to be treated in every part of our national life as a person equal in dignity and promise to all others. I think President Johnson captured well what freedom and liberty are all about, as have many of our major public citizens over time as they sought to examine this core premise of liberty and freedom and what it meant in this nation, and what it meant to create a more perfect union in this regard. Eleanor Roosevelt spent a lot of time talking about human rights, and she said, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? in small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. And indeed, today we're talking very much about the factory, farm, and office where Eleanor Roosevelt spoke of, where if rights do not have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Now, it's been long recognized that the opportunity to thrive for the individual, so fundamental to this notion of liberty and freedom, is also a powerful force for the good of our nation as a whole. This is well captured by Theodore Roosevelt. He said, "Practical equality of opportunity for all citizens, when we achieve it, has two great results. First, every man will have a fair chance to make of himself all that in him lies, to reach the highest point to which his capacities, unassisted by special privilege of his own, unhampered by the special privilege of others, can carry him, to get for himself and his family substantially what he has earned. Second," Theodore Roosevelt continued, "equality of opportunity means that the Commonwealth will get from every citizen the highest service of which he is capable. No man who carries the burden of the special privileges of another can give to the Commonwealth that service to which it is fairly entitled." So Theodore Roosevelt was speaking in the masculine, but he was talking about all citizens, men and women, equality of opportunity for the individual and for the benefit of society. Senator Ted Kennedy summarized this concept much more succinctly. He did so on August 5th of 2009 when the bill that is before this body was introduced in that year, the 2009 version. And he said the promise of America will never be fulfilled as long as justice is denied to even one among us. So again, the success of the individual in gaining full access to liberty and freedom, full opportunity to participate in society, builds a stronger community, a stronger state, and a stronger nation. The bill we have before us today is a simple concept, that an individual can pursue that place in the farm or in the factory or in the office without discrimination, that the LGBT citizen has full opportunity to fulfill their potential in the workplace. Religious groups from across America have weighed in to say how important and valuable that is. Here is a sign-on letter, a letter that is signed by approximately 60 religious groups across America. And it's addressed to each of us in this chamber. Dear Senator, on behalf of our organizations representing a diverse group of faith traditions and religious beliefs, we urge you to support the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. As a nation, we cannot tolerate arbitrary discrimination against millions of Americans just because of who they are. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people should be able to earn a living, provide for their families, and contribute to our society without fear that who they are or who they love could cost them a job. ENDA is a measured, common-sense solution that will ensure workers are judged on their merits, not on their personal characteristics like sexual orientation or gender identity. We call on you to pass this important legislation without delay. This letter from these roughly 60 religious organizations continues. Many of our religious texts speak to the important and sacred nature of work and demand in the strongest possible terms the protection of all workers as a matter of justice. Our faith leaders and congregations grapple with the difficulties of lost jobs every day, particularly in these difficult economic times. It is indefensible that, while sharing every American's concerns about the health of our economy, LGBT workers must also fear for their job security for reasons completely unrelated to their job performance. Our faith traditions, the letter continues, hold different and sometimes evolving beliefs about the nature of human sexuality and marriage, as well as gender identity and gender expression. But we can all agree on the fundamental premise that every human being is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect in the workplace. In addition, any claims that ENDA harms religious liberty are misplaced. ENDA broadly exempts from its scope houses of worship as well as religiously affiliated organizations. This exemption, which covers the same religious organizations already exempted from the religious discrimination provisions of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, should ensure that religious freedom concerns do not hinder the passage of this critical legislation. And then this letter concludes, we urge Congress to swiftly pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act so that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans have an equal opportunity to earn a living and provide for themselves and their families. The attached list, and I would like to ask the President if we can enter into the record both this letter and the sign-on list associated with it.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. This list is a list that Americans would well be familiar with. Methodist groups, Lutheran groups, Jewish groups, and so on and so forth, from the spectrum of Protestant religion, Christian religions, other religions. It's powerful and helpful that they have written to share their perspectives, and I thank them for doing so. Business coalitions have also weighed in. I have here a letter, the Business Coalition for Workplace Fairness. Their letter is much shorter. It's signed on to approximately 120 companies, and I'll read it for you now. It says, the majority of United States businesses have already started addressing workplace fairness for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender employees, but we need a federal standard that treats all employees the same way. The Business Coalition for Workplace Fairness is a group of leading U.S. employers that support the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, a federal bill that would provide the same basic protections that are already afforded to workers across the country. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender employees are not protected under federal law from being fired, refused work, or otherwise discriminated against, and ENDA would do just that. And these are companies from American Eagle Outfitters to Morgan Stanley, from Charles Schwab to Nike, from General Mills to Xerox, from Hilton Worldwide to Apple, and so on and so forth. And speaking of Apple, it might be interesting to hear the perspectives of the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook. He was writing an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and here's what he had to say. This was published, by the way, on November 3rd, just a couple days ago. He said, long before I started work as the CEO of Apple, I became aware of a fundamental truth. People are much more willing to give of themselves when they feel that their selves are being fully recognized and embraced. At Apple, we try to make sure people understand that they don't have to check their identity at the door. We're committed to creating a safe and welcoming workplace for all employees, regardless of their race, gender, nationality, or sexual orientation. As we see it, embracing people's individuality is a matter of basic human dignity and civil rights. And Tim Cook continues, it also turns out to be great for the creativity that drives our business. We found that when people feel valued for who they are, they have the comfort and confidence to do the best work of their lives. Apple's anti-discrimination policy goes beyond the legal protections U.S. workers currently enjoy under federal law, most notably because we prohibit discrimination against Apple's gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender employees. A bill now before the U.S. Senate, of course, this bill we're currently debating, would update those employment laws at long last to protect workers against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We urge senators to support the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and we challenge the House of Representatives to bring it to the floor for a vote. Protections that promote equality and diversity should not be conditional on someone's sexual orientation. For too long, too many people have had to hide that part of their identity in the workplace. That, again, was a letter from Tim Cook, published in the Wall Street Journal. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. So we see this long arc in pursuit of a vision of liberty and freedom from our early settlers of North America to the Declaration of Independence, to the opening words of our U.S. Constitution, to our leaders through a scope of time who recognized the power of liberty in fulfilling the potential of the individual and the potential of the nation, to our current religious leaders and our current business leaders. It is time that we take another bold stride in this long journey towards freedom and liberty for all Americans. And in that regard, I urge all of my colleagues to support this legislation before us. It will make a difference in millions of lives, and it will make a difference in the strength and character of our nation. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Lauren Sarkeesian and Jennifer Lucas of my staff be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I spoke at some length on this bill, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, the other day. But as we move to end debate on the bill itself, I want to once again express the critical nature of this bill for ensuring equality in the workplace for all Americans. I was just on the floor listening to Senator Merkley's very poignant remarks, and I just want everyone to know that we would not be here at this point in time with this bill before us, ready for passage tomorrow, were it not for the leadership and the persistence of Senator Merkley from Oregon. He's been a champion of this issue since he served in the Oregon legislature. And when he first came here, he became a champion of this bill. He truly picked up the mantle of Senator Ted Kennedy in picking this bill up from sort of the ashes of 1996, the last time, the only time we ever had a vote on this. And I say to my friend from Oregon, we thank you for your doggedness on this and for working across the aisle, on both sides of the aisle, to bring it first to our committee, then getting it through the committee, and now on the floor. So again, I just want the record to show that it was Senator Merkley who really spearheaded this effort, along with Senator Mark Kirk on the Republican side. The two of them fought very hard to get get us to this point and to make sure that we were actually debating it. So we are greatly indebted to the distinguished senator from Oregon for his leadership on this. So we had, I think, an incredible vote the other night that demonstrated more clearly than anything I can say that the members of this body believe in the message of equality and fairness that's embodied in this bill. The commitment and good faith with which members have negotiated and offered amendments has been, I think, a tribute to the Senate. I think what we're seeing here is how the Senate ought to work. Let's just go to the Senate at its best. We can do business here and get important things done when we share a commitment to fairness and when we act in a spirit of compromise and goodwill. And Mr. President, as I listened to the senator from Oregon, who so eloquently pointed out, too many of our citizens are being judged not by what they can contribute to a business or an organization, but by who they are or whom they choose to love. Well, the Senate is poised to take an important step towards changing that. And quite frankly, I say with all candor, I think the American people have gotten way ahead of us on this one. The American people, the great majority, believe in the right of an individual to earn a living free from discrimination and to be judged in the workplace based on their integrity, their ability, and their qualifications. This bill ensures that the same basic employment protections against discrimination that already protect American workers on the basis of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, disability also apply to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered Americans. It is rare to have before us a bill with such broad and deep support. ENDA is supported by some 60 faith-based organizations, including congregations and organizations varying from the Presbyterian Church and the Episcopal Church to the Progressive National Baptist Convention, the Union of Reformed Judaism, the Union Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Islamic Society of North America. A poll showed that 76% of American Catholics support basic workplace protections for gay and transgendered workers. And almost 70% in the same poll of evangelical Christians support employment protections for LGBT persons. Over 100 businesses support the bill. Everything from Pfizer to Levi Strauss to Hershey, Capital One, Alcoa, Marriott Hotels, Intercontinental Hotels, Texas Instruments, and on and on. 74% of Fortune 100 companies and nearly 60% of Fortune 500 companies already have sexual orientation and gender identity non-discrimination policies in place. In the course of our committee hearings on this bill, we heard from executives of Nike and General Mills who both testified that ENDA is good for business. The Nike representative told the committee, and I quote, "Teams thrive in an open and welcoming work environment where individuals are bringing their full selves to work." Since the Senate last considered a version of this bill in 1996, 17 states, and I'm proud to say, including my state of Iowa, have put legislation in place that includes these basic employment protections for our LGBT citizens. Those laws have been implemented seamlessly and have not led to any significant increase in litigation. But certainly is not to say what we're doing here is not necessary. The majority of Americans, 56.6%, still live in states where it is perfectly legal to fire someone or refuse to hire them because of who they are, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered American. Discrimination in the workplace is real. 42% of LGBT workers report having experienced some form of discrimination at work. 7% reported having lost a job as a result just of their sexual orientation. Far too many hardworking Americans continue to be judged not by their ability and their qualifications, but by their sexual orientation or gender identity. I talked the other day about Sam Hall, a West Virginia miner, who faced destruction of his property and verbal harassment from his coworkers because of his identity as a gay person. Sam is one of those millions of Americans who has no legal recourse without this law. I also talked about Kyler Brodus, who faced intense harassment at work as he transitioned from female to male and who has never recovered financially. I talked about Allison Robinson, forced to live in a different state apart from her family because she could not find a job as an openly transgendered female. So this law will make a real difference for these Americans and for millions more like them. I remember, Mr. President, 23 years ago, I stood at this podium, at this desk, as the sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as the chair then of the Subcommittee on Disability Policy. Senator Kennedy was the chair at that time. And I talked about the necessity for the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of a courthouse door. I pointed out that as of that time, if you were an African American or maybe a woman, or let's say you were Jewish, and you went down to get a job for which you were fully qualified, and the employer said, you know, I'm not hiring black people. I don't hire black people. Don't like it. Get out of here. I don't hire Jews. Get out of here. You could leave there and go right down the street to the courthouse, and the courthouse door was open to you. Because in 1964, we passed the Civil Rights Act that covered people that way. We said you have recourse under law for violations of your inherent civil rights based on sex, national origin, religion, race. But as of 1990, if you were a person with a disability and you went down to the prospective employer to get a job for which you were fully qualified, and the prospective employer said, get out of here. I don't hire cripples. Get out of here. And you wheeled your wheelchair down the street to the courthouse. The doors were locked. You had no recourse under law for that violation of your civil rights because it was not a civil right. So in 1990, we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, and now the courthouse door is open. If you're discriminated against because of your disability, you can go down to the courthouse. You've got the law on your side. I stand here today 23 years later saying that we have covered civil rights laws in this country for almost everyone, except for those for whom gender identity or sexual orientation is part of who they are. That's true. As I pointed out, we've got reams of records here. People fired because they were gay or lesbian. Not because they couldn't do the job, not because they weren't doing their job. They were just fired because that's who they were. And guess what? That gay person walked down that courthouse door, it's locked. It's locked. Just as it was for people with disabilities before 1990. Just as it was for African Americans before 1964. And for women. These young people working here, these young women, they don't realize that in the lifetime of their parents, at least their grandparents anyway, you could fire someone because she was a woman. Or not hire someone because she was a woman. And guess what? Courthouse door was locked. You had no recourse. Now, some states passed civil rights laws, so we had some states pass civil rights laws. As I said, we've had 17 states in America that do have laws in the books that ban discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. But how about the rest of the states? As I said, over 56% of American workers live in states in which there is no protection. And so in the long march of the American experiment, from the time of our founding and the Bill of Rights, from our Declaration of Independence, where he said all people are created equal. Well, step by step, sometimes long and painfully, sometimes too long and too painfully, we have expanded this covenant to bring more people into the American family, to recognize that people should be judged not on the basis of some externalities like the color of their skin or their sex or their religion or national origin or disability or whether they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered. Everyone should have these civil rights to be covered by civil rights. So they'll be judged on their contribution to society, by what they do, not by who they are. And that's why this vote is so important. That's why this really is an historic step, again, for the United States Senate. I mean, you can look back. And yes, there were people that opposed the Civil Rights Bill of '64. We had people here that opposed the Americans with Disabilities Act. But look back and see what they did for America. We're a stronger and a better country because of those laws that were passed. Much better country for everyone, for our families, for the elderly, for everyone. And so I hope that those who may be thinking, well, gee, I don't want to support this, I'm not a big fan of gay people, or I may have some religious problems on that side. We have religious exemptions in here. That's not the issue here. The issue is whether or not that should be an allowable reason to be discriminated against in employment. Well, as I said, we've said before, that's not a legitimate reason for race, sex, national origin, religion, or disability. Why should it be a reason based upon your sexual orientation or gender identity? So I hope my fellow senators will think about what would they have done had they been here to vote on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What if they had been here just 23 years ago to vote on the Americans with Disabilities Act? This Employment Non-Discrimination Act takes its place alongside all of those. That's why it is such an historic, important vote. The bill sponsors, Senator Jeff Merkley, Senator Mark Kirk, Senator Tammy Baldwin, and Senator Susan Collins, have worked long and hard on this. They worked closely with us and the committee over the last few days to continue to build support for this bill, to work through proposals to change and improve it. So we're finishing the debate. Tomorrow we will have the final vote on this bill. Passing it with a resounding majority will send a clear message to the American people and to the House of Representatives that we've waited long enough. Just think about this. This bill failed by only one vote in 1996. One vote. So here we are 17 years later. It is time to pass it. It's time now to end workplace discrimination against any member of our American family based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I mentioned yesterday in my remarks on the floor that the Obama administration has had 3.5 years to prepare for the rollout of the President's signature health care law. It's had 3.5 years to get the website right and ready for its big debut. It's had 3.5 years to take all of the necessary safeguards to protect privacy and also the integrity of the Internet, particularly the website, make sure that it's not ripe for identity theft and other cyber attacks. And it's had 3.5 years to get together a proper vetting system for the so-called navigators. But despite all that time, it's quite apparent that Obama is not yet ready. Obamacare is not ready for prime time yet, and in fact has been a slow-moving train wreck. The President's in Dallas today meeting with a number of the so-called navigators to thank them for their work. I was able to ask Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, about the navigators this morning, and she admitted that there is no background check done of the navigators, even though they will collect some of the most sensitive personal information that you can have, including things like your Social Security number that can be then used to hack into your accounts, your health information, whether it's mental or physical, which is among the most sensitive personal information each of us have. Well, she admitted that since they don't do any background check, she couldn't guarantee that a convicted felon couldn't be a navigator. She said that was possible. I think something that really grabbed a lot of people's attention because they just naturally assumed that this sort of thing had been taken care of in the 3.5 years leading up to the rollout of Obamacare. Well, we know that the more people find out about this law, I liken it to an onion. With each layer of the onion you peel back, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. The law is proving to be even more unworkable and even more disruptive than its biggest critics could have even imagined. But I want to focus my remaining moments here on the floor on two issues: privacy and security. The Obamacare website went live on October the 1st, but according to CBS News, a deadline for final security plans was delayed 3 times this summer, and a final top-to-bottom security check was never finished before the launch. Now, that's pretty astonishing. Something as big, as widely anticipated, and as long planned for as the rollout of Obamacare and its website, a security check was not even completed before it was rolled out on October the 1st. So just think what it means. It means the administration was encouraging Americans to enter sensitive personal information into the Obamacare website, even though it knew the website was not secure. And of course, we know the website isn't functioning properly now. And White House officials continue to refuse to even give Congress the number of people who successfully navigated the Obamacare website and signed up on the exchanges. Well, you know what that must mean. That must mean the number is embarrassingly small. But they're also scrambling to do damage control. The President is urging people to contact their local Obamacare navigators to sign up for health insurance and suggesting, well, maybe you ought to do it by paper or by telephone. Well, we found out that the same queue or lineup that makes it impossible to sign up over the Internet is presented with paper applications or telephone applications as well. As I said, the President met with some of the Obamacare navigators in Dallas Texas today, and I trust that the overwhelming number of these navigators are people that can be trusted with some of the most sensitive personal information that we Americans have. But the problem is we don't know for sure because they haven't been vetted and there's not even a criminal background check required. Remember, the navigators are going to be collecting some of the most sensitive personal information you have, including your Social Security number, your protected health information like your past, present, or future physical, mental health, or condition. We've passed other laws, the Health Information Privacy Act, known as HIPAA, to protect this information because we recognize how sensitive it can be. Of course, it will also, the navigators will also collect information about physical or email address, tax information, because, of course, the Internal Revenue Service is going to be instrumental in the implementation of Obamacare. No federal requirements for background checks for individuals serving as navigators. Now, this has to be a glaring oversight, something that I would hope even the most ardent advocates for Obamacare would acknowledge is a big mistake and need to be fixed. But in the absence of thorough background checks and reliable oversight mechanisms, the Navigator program could easily become a magnet for fraud and abuse. We know what a big a problem identity theft is already and how much havoc it can present for people's personal financial affairs and information. We also know how vulnerable things like websites can be to cyber attacks where people can collect information unbeknownst to the consumer. Well, we've already heard some anecdotal reports about Obamacare navigators, including a woman who had an outstanding arrest warrant at the time she was hired, along with former members of an organization known as ACORN that's had its own share of problems with corruption and law-breaking. As I said a moment ago, these people will be allowed to collect some of the most sensitive personal information that we have as Americans. Well, thinking of sensitive information, the most important provisions of Obamacare, including the individual mandate, the employer mandate, and the premium subsidies, will be administered by, you guessed it, the Internal Revenue Service. Words that strike fear and trepidation in the hearts of many Americans, especially given the scandals that the Internal Revenue Service is embroiled in and bipartisan investigations that are ongoing into the cause and solution to these scandals. I know I speak for many of my constituents back home in Texas and perhaps many other Americans when I say that the last thing we ought to be doing is giving the IRS additional responsibilities until we've gotten to the bottom of the current scandals that we are investigating on a bipartisan basis. We don't need to be giving them vast new powers to intrude in the lives of families and small businesses. Matter of fact, I've introduced legislation that would prevent the IRS from performing this act. You know, the last thing we want to do when they're having problems doing what they're already supposed to be doing is to give them more to do without solving the underlying problem. But unfortunately, our friends across the aisle have blocked that legislation that would ban the IRS from its current role in administering Obamacare. I'd like to remind them that even if we ignore the agency's harassment of conservative organizations and ordinary American citizens engaging in their constitutional right to participate in the political process, we know the IRS has already shown contempt for the law by announcing that it will issue Obamacare's premium subsidies through the federal exchanges, even though the law makes clear that premium subsidies are not available in the federal exchange, but only through the state exchange. But that's just a minor technical detail to the IRS. They're going to paper that over, even though Congress provided to the contrary. Well, at some point, the President needs to concede that the costs of Obamacare far outweigh its benefits. And we can do better. The choice is not between Obamacare and nothing. The choice is between Obamacare and consumer-oriented alternatives that will increase competition, will lower health care costs, enable more people to be covered, together with reforms of Medicaid and perhaps even Medicare to make sure that people have true access to health care coverage and not just a hollow promise. At some point, even the most ardent advocates for Obamacare have to concede that it is broken beyond repair. And I have to say that I think time is not on Obamacare's side, because each day brings out a new revelation of more and more problems. And even some of our colleagues who voted in a party line vote for Obamacare and who voted in a party line vote against any opportunity to reform Obamacare are now saying, hey, maybe we need to delay the penalties, like Senator Max Baucus, one of the chief Senate architects. Senator Mary Landrieu has introduced a bill, or will, saying that we ought to enforce in law the President's promise that if you like what you have, you can keep it, which we now know is not true. And indeed, HHS and the administration knew in 2010 that tens of millions of Americans who like what they have will not be able to keep their health care bill because of restricted grandfathering provisions. So when the moment comes that Democrats and Republicans can come together to try to solve this problem, not by shoring up this fatally flawed structure known as Obamacare that will never work, when they're ready to work with us across the aisle to enact alternative health care reforms that reduce costs, expand coverage, and improve quality of access to care, I look forward to that debate and that opportunity. I can only hope that that day arrives sooner rather than later, before Obamacare wreaks more havoc and causes more uncertainty and hardship on the American consumer. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I'd suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.